instead of trying to work with this system, Americans need to do some soul searching and say, is it time to get back on the right track of this country and have a total free market economic system, a free market healthcare system, and a free market monetary system? And that's the case I would be making if I were the presidential nominee of this party.
It's Thursday, April 23rd, 2020. Welcome to Barney and Clyde Season 2, Episode 8. We're deviating from our normal format to bring a special guest, Jacob Hornberger, Libertarian Party candidate for President of the United States. He's an American political scientist and founder of the Future of Freedom Foundation and director of programs for the Foundation for Economic Education, that most of us would recognize as FEE or FEE. And Mr. Hornberger holds a law degree as well as a degree in economics, I believe. And first question, if you were to be elected president in November, would that make you the first president to hold a degree in economics?
That's a good question. First of all, let me point out that I actually was program director at FEE from a long time ago, from 87 to 89.
Oh, I apologize.
No, that's okay. And then after that, I founded the Future of Freedom Foundation, where I've served as president ever since. And I should issue a disclaimer that FFF does not endorse my candidacy. So that's an interesting question. I don't know. I really don't know the answer to that question.
Actually, gentlemen, I think Ronald Reagan had a degree in economics from Eureka College.
Well, let's put it this way. I'd be the first president that would truly understand economics.
Okay.
Okay. Well, let's talk about ourselves here really quickly before we kick into full gear. Barney, do you want to introduce our Venn diagram overlap situation to Mr. Hornberger?
You bet. When Clyde, we're now well into our second year of doing this, and when Clyde sprang this idea on me in the first place, the premise is that Clyde is a libertarian and I am a conservative, and that there would be, and that's been demonstrated to be true, a lot of Venn diagram overlap. And that area consists of our common belief that in the primacy of human freedom, that freedom is the essential condition for human flourishing. Given that we look at that a little differently, there's areas outside the Venn diagram overlap that show up once in a while in our discussions, principally in the areas of foreign policy and a few social issues, if you will. But it's all very fun to investigate. We generally take about four things that are on the nation's plate each segment. And we do this every other week. We say we deliver it fortnightly and forthrightly. And we examine, we kick around four issues and agree on what they're going to be and examine them from a libertarian and a conservative standpoint. And it's an hour-long show, and we're steadily gaining followers and subscribers, and it's just been a really a lot of fun and really gratifying.
Sounds awesome. Sounds like a very interesting show.
Yeah,
I'm ready to participate.
Thanks for being here.
So I'm of the opinion that a person can be a conservative and a libertarian at the same time. I think the key is, are you willing to use the force of government to enforce conservative principles or whatever principles you might have? So I thought maybe it might be a good time for Barney to ask a couple of questions to you as a conservative who's not necessarily, who certainly doesn't have Trump derangement syndrome, but certainly isn't a Trump fan either. You want to go through a couple of questions you have for Mr. Hornberger?
Well, yeah, it probably helps to kind of narrow down where I fit on the spectrum. There's a number of ways people like myself are classified. Sometimes the broad brush of never Trump is applied. I'm not real comfortable with that term, but conservatives who find our current president objectionable, and let's put it that way, always have since he descended the escalator in 2015, and he continues to confirm my inclinations every day. I've got some questions, of course, when we get into that. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's just start in then. Here we go. We'll start right in. Mr. Hornberger, to what extent did your own military experience, like attending the Virginia Military Institute, being commissioned a second lieutenant, and infantry school, shape your subsequent views? Do you feel that it sharpened your sense of what the proper and improper roles of our nation's defense apparatus are?
Yeah, it really did. But even more than the role of government in foreign affairs, it also shaped my views as the role of government in domestic affairs.
Okay.
Virginia Military Institute, as you all may know, is a total military school. That is, all the students have to be in the Corps. And so everybody dresses up in uniforms. There's no civilian clothes in barracks or in classes. You go to classes in uniform. It's a strictly regimented, tightly controlled system. And when I was there, it was at the height of the Vietnam War, which created some real tension because a lot of the cadets, especially the upperclassmen, were figuring out that all the stuff we'd been indoctrinated with about Vietnam and stopping the communists and stuff, that was disintegrating. And there were a lot of cadets achieving breakthroughs and realizing this was all just a big crock. And it was needlessly costing the lives of lots of soldiers, including VMI grads. In fact, one of the most moving experiences was when we would be in the mess hall for evening supper, and somebody would go up to the microphone, and I forget what the words he would use, but everybody knew what they meant, and they would say something like, "Attention to orders, Republic of South Vietnam," and then the whole Corps would 1,000 people would go immediately silent. I mean, you could hear the pin dropping on the floor, and we knew what was coming, that Lieutenant such and such class of 67 killed in action this day, and so there was a lot of tension. But what I got a really good education out of VMI. I graduated with a degree in economics, and it got me into law school. So I'll always be grateful for that. But I didn't. Now, this was before I discovered libertarianism. But I did not fit well with the military environment. But some people ask me sometimes, "What did you learn at VMI?" And I said, "Well, I got a good education, but I also learned what it's like to live in a socialist, tightly militaristic, regimented society. I mean, like the Soviet Union or something like that, or Red China," because we had a commandant, a president of the school that was a Marine that thought that the college life should be like a military version of, or a college version of boot camp at Paris Island. And so everything was tightly controlled. The state took care of us. They would make sure we were in bed on time. They would feed us. We would march down to the mess hall at prescribed times. We would get up to reveille with the bugle going. I mean, this is your classic socialist militarist society, totalitarian society. Justice was arbitrary. There was no protections that we know of as constitutional protections. So it was really living in a tightly controlled society, and I did not like it at all. So, but it taught me what it's like to live in that kind of society. So my libertarian instincts were saying, "Man, I don't like this one bit." But so then I discovered libertarianism, and I said, "Oh, okay, now I get it. This is why I didn't like that." But at least I had the experience of it.
Fascinating.
Yeah, well, thanks. That's a thorough answer. Clyde, it's your turn.
Okay. Yeah, so we met briefly at the Indiana State LP convention. So it's an honor to get to talk to you again. One thing I noticed about you is you're not tamping down or watering down the libertarian message like a lot of candidates have in the past. So I certainly find that a breath of fresh air. But is that the good strategy to win? Is that sort of go for broke kind of strategy, or why such brevity now?
Well, that's we're going to find out if it's a good strategy or not in a few weeks when the delegates select the nominee. I mean, when I jumped into this race, I mean, I understood that I had an uphill battle because I know that the party has attracted a lot of what I call Republican lights. And these are people from the Republican Party that have come into our party and tried to convert our party into a lighter version of the Republican Party. So instead of dismantling infringements on liberty, which I say is an absolute prerequisite to achieving freedom, they want to just keep the welfare warfare state intact. They're scared to death of freedom. They're scared to death of offending people by calling for freedom. So they say, let's reform Social Security. Let's reform public schooling. Let's reform the DEA. Let's reform ICE and the Pentagon, the CIA, and so forth. So when I came to this race, it was with the idea that our principles, I mean, libertarianism is a very radical philosophy. It rejects Republican lightism. And so I believe that our principles are our greatest asset in this party. I served on the platform committee back in the 90s, and there were people who were trying to water down the platform in order to try to get more votes. And I just resisted that. I said, this is who we are. We are the party of principle. If we start watering down our principles, then we got to get rid of this motto because it's false advertising. But you see, the argument against me was, oh, our principles are an albatross. They're costing us votes. Well, it was mostly because I think these people, these Republican lights, don't know how to make the case for freedom. And so they settle for Republican lightism. But I believe our principles are our greatest asset. So I said, okay, I'm going to enter this race and run a campaign of principle for the party of principle. And I didn't know where it was going to go, but I knew I had an uphill battle because I know over the last 20 years how many people we've attracted into the party that just settle for reform. Well, then I started doing well. I started winning primaries and caucuses and straw polls. And I mean, I was so excited and so gratified. I knew I was touching chords in the party that had existed. But I saw some of the newbies, their eyes were this big when I would talk about real freedom. And, but you know, I could tell I was touching their chords too. They'd never heard this message before. They've heard all the reform this, reform that, school vouchers, health savings accounts, all the stuff that is really antithetical to freedom. I hold that if we want a free society, and that's what libertarianism is all about, and that's what the party is ultimately about. That was why it was founded 49 years ago, to achieve the free society. So we get people in public office, not just for an end in of itself. I mean, you know, if you want that, you can bring Jeb Bush and Mitt Romney in and have them be our nominees and think how many votes they would get. But our goal is freedom. And so my argument is that if you want to achieve the genuinely free society, you've got to identify what are the infringements on freedom, and then you've got to dismantle them, which means going to the American people and making the case for freedom by dismantling these infringements. We don't know what the results would be, but the only way to achieve that free society is to get people to start thinking about it. If libertarians are not going to make the case for freedom, who is?
Hear, hear. Yeah, I think if you're not going to win on principles, you're not going to win on the message, what's the point of winning?
Exactly. I mean, let's say you run a Republican light campaign and you get 10% of the vote. Let's say you get $10 million. Who cares? I mean, what has it accomplished in terms of freedom? Oh, sure, you've put somebody in public office, but what good's it do? And you can't ever backtrack. I mean, once you set forth your platform that you're going to preserve this program, preserve that program, and just reform it, you can't get into office and say, ha, I faked you out. I'm really about abolishing it, because boy, the voters will punish you and every other libertarian 2 years later or 4 years later. I say, let's just be honest with people. This is what our philosophy is. This is our way of moving America in a better, freer, more prosperous, peaceful direction. And if voters say, well, Jacob, you know, I've analyzed your program and your philosophy and I just can't vote for you. Okay, nobody's guaranteed success in life, but that's the only chance we have. And this is why I keep saying, if you want to play it safe to the party members, elect a Republican-like candidate. You'll play it safe. You'll get your 3%. And they all get, there's a lot of people that celebrate this 3 or 4%. And I'm sitting there saying, we've been here 49 years and we're celebrating 3 or 4%. Let's run a bold campaign, a campaign purely on principle for the party of principle. Let's roll the dice. And could we go back to 1%? Yeah. Okay. So what? At least we go down fighting as libertarians as who we are. But with boldness, you got a chance for the big payoff. And I figure we've earned the right to a big payoff after 49 years.
Well, what's involved in asserting or inserting that message of real freedom into a national conversation that as you say, the range seems to be from mild collectivism to its most severe form. What's involved in inserting an advocacy of real freedom into our national conversation with things being the way they are?
Oh, I think it's fantastic, especially with respect to this crisis. I mean, I've been making this case for, a long time, but then this crisis now has heightened, I think, the importance of this case. This is not the time for hesitation or faltering or meekness. This is life or death now. When we see it with this coronavirus crisis, you've got a centrally planned healthcare system, Centers for Disease Control, FDA, all the bureaucrats, all the regulations, the president's task force on the coronavirus thing. You've got all these bureaucracies interfering with healthcare providers, no testing kits or insufficient number of mass testing kits, defective testing kits. This is classic government central planning. What I'm saying is, look, we have an opportunity here to show the American people that don't elect me because I'm going to be a better central planner here. It's their system that's defective. That when you've got a defective system that's inherently defective, we're not talking about broken, we're talking about a system that cannot be made to work, whoever is in charge of it. Replace it with a free market system where you get rid of all these government bureaucracies. And now we've got the healthcare industry that is leading us and guiding us out of this crisis. Now you got the professionals instead of all these little mini dictators, mayors and governors and presidents and so forth. So this is an opportunity that I'm telling the party we've got to seize, because now we can go to voters and say, look, if you like the direction this country's heading in and you like where we are, vote for Trump or vote for Biden. Doesn't matter, because they both stand for the same systems. You want out of this crisis, then go for a new system, which is a system that will lead you to life and liberty and peace, prosperity and harmony. And oh, by the way, this time your vote really does count, because it's a life or death vote. Big stakes here.
Let's talk about the financial aspect of this for a minute. Given that the federal government undertook the massive new spending to address the pandemic's impact at a time when its entitlement programs were already perilously awash in unfunded liabilities, what kind of hope can you offer Americans that there's a way to avoid falling over the precipice?
Well, it's getting very close to falling over the precipice. And in fact, they may have already gone over the precipice with what they're doing. It's incredible. I mean, absolutely incredible, because they've already put the federal government into $23 trillion of debt. That's up to before the crisis.
Right.
Now, who has to pay that debt? That's the American taxpayers. When that debt comes due, and I forget what the amount is now, but I think it's about $200,000 per taxpayer. Now, how many taxpayers in America have $200,000 to suddenly pay off that debt? But I guarantee you, they are liable for it. Now, then you've got $1 trillion that big spender Trump was spending. Now, remember, Trump said he was going to come into office and reduce the debt and eradicate the debt. He is spending as much money as Hillary Clinton before the coronavirus. So he was adding $1 trillion more. So that's $24 trillion in debt. Then they're adding $2 trillion on with his stimulus. That's 26. And the experts are saying that they're just getting a good start, that it's going to go up to 30 trillion. Well, you know, you get to a point where we've seen this in Italy, where the government simply cannot sustain all the unfunded liabilities, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all the people that are demanding their money. Now, you know, you hear Social Security recipients, I have a right to get my money back. Their money's gone. It was taxed.
I know.
And they're taking it, that $2 trillion for Medicare and Social Security is coming from the younger people of this country every month through withholding. Government doesn't have a magic act here. They're not producing wealth. They're confiscating wealth. And when you add all this other stuff, now people think, oh, I'm getting these free checks. I'm getting these free checks. Well, all they're doing is just charging up somebody's credit card. Suppose somebody says, Jacob, we're sending you $1,000 check, but oh, by the way, check your MasterCard bill because you got another $1,000 you owe on that. Well, it's ridiculous, but that's what they're doing. And then the Federal Reserve in this thing, they're just printing money like it was going out of style. They're debasing the currency. So the precipice, I think, is getting very, very close. There is no way a country can continue doing this with this type of government spending.
And I think that your piece, your blog post where the Fed's getting all that money from the 21st of April is a good resource for anyone who wants to kind of dive into that some more.
Well, thank you. Yeah, this is Frederick Bastiat's great point, and the French free market legislator, libertarian from the 19th century, where
one of our mutual heroes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he wrote that great little book, The Law, where he said,
yeah.
The state is the great fictitious entity by which everyone seeks to live at the expense of everyone else.
Yep.
And we forget about that when the government's giving all this free money out, they're taxing us because there's no other way to get that money. And everybody's saying, don't tax me. because otherwise the money's not free. I want you to tax him and her and it.
Right.
Well, so you get this conflict in society where people are saying, tax everybody else, give me the loot. How can a society survive where everybody's over there trying to plunder and loot each other?
Yeah, my wife and I were just talking about that, as middle income people, how much that $1,200 each and $500 per kid, how much is that going to cost us? Because there's no way, as the people who are footing the bill for everyone to get the same, there's no way that we're coming out even on this thing. We're going to get hosed.
Oh, big time. I mean, this is a massive bailout bill for the big companies and the big corporations that fund these Democrat and Republican campaigns. I mean, that's where the lion's share of the money is going. And what they did is they threw out this little $1,200 and $500 per child morsel to keep everybody pacified and silent and quiet, and not realizing what the heck's really happening here. But when you look at the amount of the debt that's now being added on to the national debt, and then when you see the debasement of the currency, the inflation of this massive inflation of the money supply, where people on fixed incomes are going to be wiped out. A lot of people's assets are going to be wiped out when this thing grabs a hold. People are going to start realizing that $1,200 check or $1,700 check, it was nothing compared to the losses that they're going to bear from what the government's doing with borrowing and printing money.
That's right. The Representative Thomas Massey of Kentucky called that the cheese in the trap. That $1,200 was the cheese in the trap. And I think that that's pretty well spot on as people talk about how if you dare to go outside during this situation, you're going to kill some little old lady, but if you express concerns about the economy suffering, they expect you to that you're just some kind of money grubbing, horrible capitalist, twisting your mustache and hashing out evil plans. But they don't realize that the economy is people. It is what binds people together. It is how people make their way in life. And that if you zap that little old lady's retirement or her whatever income she has, or devalue all of her savings, then you're causing irreparable damage to that person, even if they're perfectly healthy.
They've been doing that for decades. I mean, that's what the Federal Reserve does. I mean, think how many people have had their life savings wiped out through devaluation. I mean, you get a monthly check of, let's say, $500. Well, that was a lot of money back in 1960. But today, what's $500 going to do for you? And that's what the Federal Reserve does. If I could be permitted to show what the alternative of this is, because I think
Please.
I think we need to do a lot of soul searching in this country as to where we are as a country. And this is a good time for soul searching. There's nothing like the possibility of death to focus people's attention and make things real. That we got to go back to founding principles in this country to see where we deviated. And one of the good founding principles, we know there were some bad founding principles, slavery and so forth, but one of the good ones was everybody got to keep everything they earned. There was no IRS. There was no income tax. You got to keep 100% of your earnings. And that system stayed in place for more than 100 years. They also had a very big system of sound money. They had a gold coin, silver coin standard where the government could not debase the currency. Well, these two systems combined to cause Americans to discover what the world had never discovered. And that is, what are the causes of a rising standard of living in a society? We often hear, what are the causes of poverty? Well, poverty is the natural state. The real question is, what is it that causes a nation to have rising standards of living for everyone? Well, Americans discovered it. Keep everything you earn and decide for yourself what to do with it. No mandatory charity programs, no Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, farm subsidies, education grants, foreign aid, nothing. You keep 100% and you decide what to do with it. Well, this society produced huge rises of standards of living, especially as it started really going forward in the late 1800s and early 1900s. It was incredible. Also, the most charitable nation in history. I mean, this is how the hospitals got built, and the foundations and the opera houses and the museums and libraries. Well, how did that happen? Because people were free to save a huge amount of their income. Now, they'd consume, okay, they'd go on vacation, whatever. But when you keep 100% of your income, there's no withholding. Your employer's not withholding anything. You can save a lot of money. Now, if you look at what's happened today, where we have the exact opposite kind of system, where the government just has massive income taxation, payroll withholding to fund these giant, what I call mandatory charity programs, which are really not charity at all because they're run by the IRS and the Social Security Administration or the Medicare Administration. I just read 2 articles this week where younger people do not have any savings right now. A large portion, maybe half of Americans do not have savings to get them through 1 or 2 months of unemployment. And then people around 40-year-olds are saying, we don't have the same ability to do what our parents did. We can't buy a house at this age. Like they were buying houses in their 20s or 30s. We can't do that. And now, so this coronavirus crisis is exposing this dark underside of this economic system. And that is that people are living on the edge to such an extent that now this crisis hits. How do they survive? I mean, even they get this, let's say $2,500 check. Okay, that takes care of a couple months or whatever. In the meantime, the government's plundering and looting through inflation and through massive borrowing. And I mean, this is a really bad system. And what I'm saying is, instead of trying to work with this system, Americans need to do some soul searching and say, is it time to get back on the right track of this country and have a total free market economic system, a free market healthcare system, and a free market monetary system? And that's the case I would be making if I were the presidential nominee of this party.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Nothing makes my teeth grind more than the assertion that healthcare is a right. By definition, it can't be. You can't have a right to the efforts of your fellow human being. It's not far down that slippery slope until you're talking about the S word, slavery. I often, people say that, I retort, how did people in the year 1300 avail themselves of exercise their right to a triple bypass?
It's a fantastic point. And if I may, and it creates this mindset of entitlement that we have a right to do this. We have a right to our Medicare payments and so forth. Meanwhile, seniors don't realize that this whole socialist apparatus has taken our country down. And they sit there and say, well, yeah, but I put it in, I have a right to get it back. You didn't put into anything. You got taxed. Everybody gets taxed to fund these welfare programs. Now, let me give you what life was like before these programs. I grew up in the poorest city in the United States, Laredo, Texas. That's what the Census Bureau said. Every day, doctors' offices, when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, they were filled with people, mostly poor people. The city is 97% Mexican American. And a lot of the patients were coming from Nuevo Laredo, which is right across the river, which is has more poverty. There was never an instance of a doctor turning away any patient for inability to pay. They just did it for free. They knew they couldn't pay. And nonetheless, the doctors were still the second wealthiest people in town, second only to the oil people, because income taxes were still so low that they were making a lot of money off the people who could pay. So they were just ethically saying, I want to do this for a senior or a poor person or whatever. And the doctors love what they did in life. They were making house calls. My doctor, we would call him up and say, hey, we need a tetanus shot. And he'd say, come by the house and I'll give it to you. Then Medicare and Medicaid come into existence, and that was the end of it. That's when healthcare costs started soaring. Now, let me go back a minute again. Also, people didn't have healthcare insurance. Okay, why? Now, they may have had catastrophic, but hardly anybody had major medical. Why? Because healthcare costs were so low and so stable that nobody needed it. The whole issue of pre-existing conditions didn't arise because going to the doctors, whether you had this condition or that condition, was so cheap. It was like going to the grocery store. How many people have grocery store insurance to protect against the soaring price of the grocery store? Yeah. The Medicare and Medicaid came into it, and they destroyed it. That's when healthcare costs started soaring. And why wouldn't it? You've got this huge artificial government-imposed demand on the system, claiming, oh, well, this is needed because seniors and poor people. It wasn't needed because of seniors and poor people. And so as the things got worse and worse and worse, people started getting dependent on this system. They started saying, oh, people would never survive without it. And the only solution to it is get rid of it. It's like you have a cancer on your body and a tumor, and you go to the doctor, and the doctor says, you're going to die if you don't have this cancer. And the person says, well, I'm used to that. I don't want to go through the hard recovery process of a surgery. Well, that's what this is. This is a tumor. We need to remove this tumor in order to restore health to this healthcare system, which would mean if we got rid of these two programs, healthcare costs would plummet. I mean, plummet down to reasonable levels. People don't have to worry about seniors. You got doctors that would treat people for free. You've got people that would help in terms of charitable organizations. We need to recapture this faith and freedom in ourselves and voluntary charity, a faith, for me, a faith in God instead of a faith in government to do all this stuff.
Absolutely.
I'd like to switch gears for a moment and throw this at you. What would your ideal Secretary of State look like?
Somebody that would understand the principles that were set forth in John Quincy Adams' 4th of July speech in 1821.
Okay.
A speech called In Search of Monsters to Destroy. Remarkable speech. You can see it online. Adams said that the U.S. government, that there's a lot of monsters around the world. Tyrants, dictators, civil wars, famines, revolutions, civil wars between countries, but that the U.S. government would not go abroad in search of these monsters to destroy. That would not be the role of the government, not to serve as a policeman, an arbiter, or whatever. That the government would stay here and limit itself in what was called a limited government republic with a basic military force to protect the country in case it ever got invaded, which was a virtually non-existent possibility, but not go abroad in search of these monsters to destroy. Don't send troops abroad for anything. Now, if private Americans wanted to go help people out, they were revolting against a tyrannical regime, they would be free to go join the resistance, join the revolutionaries, but keep the government home. And so I would want a Secretary of State that would be in 100% agreement with that mission. Bring all the troops home. This is what I stand for. Bring all the troops home immediately, without any hesitation, but from everywhere, not just Afghanistan and Iraq. Notice that Trump couldn't even bring troops from the two countries that he promised to bring them home from, or at least in the Middle East and Afghanistan. I would bring them home from Korea, Europe, World War II's over, Africa, Middle East, Afghanistan, Latin America, and then discharge them. As soon as they hit American shores, they get their discharge orders. They're now into the private sector. That would save loads of money. And it would produce all these soldiers in the private sector where they're producing wealth instead of consuming wealth through taxes. So that's the kind of Secretary of State I would want, is somebody that would recognize the importance of a non-interventionist foreign policy and would be 100% in agreement with it.
Okay.
Is there anybody specific that's currently in the public eye that would fit that bill?
Just about any libertarian.
I'm not sure I can accept your offer, sir.
Not all libertarians. I mean, there's some libertarians that like selective intervention. I would want somebody that says we've got to end this policy of foreign interventionism entirely, even on a selective basis. Just bring back the government and rein it in what we call a limited government republic. Right now, we live under what's called a national security state. CIA, NSA, massive military-industrial complex, Pentagon, defense contractors, and all this. It's an empire. It's a military intelligence empire. It is a totalitarian government structure. It came into existence after World War II. North Korea is a national security state. Cuba is a national security state. Russia, China, Pakistan, Egypt, and post-World War II U.S. This system, and this is one of my beefs with some of my opponents in this race for the LP nomination. They love the national security state. They think it keeps us safe. There is no way that anybody can be considered free under a national security state, whether it's a U.S. national security state or a Cuban national security state. One of the only governmental systems that is consistent with liberty is a limited government republic. That's what I want to restore to our country with a basic military force.
The only thing that I need more clarification on from you is several of the countries you just mentioned, Cuba, North Korea, Iran, are actively diminish or to endanger us, it seems to me.
I question that notion entirely. What has Cuba ever done to endanger our liberty or lives or anything?
Well, okay. Cuba's, yeah, kind of.
But let me just pursue that with you, Barney. That throughout the Cold War, we heard this, that Cuba is a dagger at America's neck from 90 miles away. It's a communist threat. It's a threat to our being, our life, livelihoods, and all this. It was actually the other way around the whole time. It was just a crock. It was propaganda. It was very effective propaganda because it was always the CIA and the national security state that was the aggressor against Cuba. Cuba never invaded the United States. They never came in here and committed acts of terrorism. They never tried to assassinate any American officials. It was always the other way around. The CIA tried to assassinate Castro, which I consider just legalized murder. And they invaded the country. They have an embargo against the country and designed to strangle it. Now, do I agree with the communist philosophy? Of course not. But that doesn't give the authority. The fact that a communist regime exists or an independent regime of the U.S. empire doesn't give the authority to the U.S. government to be meddling in the affairs of that country. Now, if we take Iran, what has Iran ever done to the United States? It's the exact opposite. If you go back to 1953, they had a democratic system there. The democratic elected prime minister was a man named Mohammad Mossadegh. Time magazine's Man of the Year. Was he a libertarian? No. He nationalized British oil, much like Latin Americans have nationalized oil industries down there. We wouldn't approve of that as libertarians. But the CIA comes to the aid of these British oil companies and goes in and initiates a coup. This is an act of aggression against an independent country that ousts Mossadegh from power, puts in the Shah of Iran, who was a brutal, unelected dictator. They then proceed to help him establish his brutal Savak national police force that brutalizes the Iranian people, tortures them, executes them, assassinates them, indefinite detention for some 25 years. So the Iranian people finally revolt in 1979 against this horrible revolution, this horrible tyrant. And they end up, unfortunately, not able to restore the democratic system that the CIA had destroyed. They end up with maybe a worse dictatorship, at least arguably as bad as the Shah's. And that's why the CIA has been angry at them ever since, and the military, that they believe that the Iranian people did not have the right to oust their stooge, the Shah of Iran. And that's what this whole animosity is about. It's about regime change. So we've got sanctions against the Iranian people right now that I call the banality of evil. I mean, sanctions target the populace of a nation. The Iranian people love Americans. I know Iranian Americans, and I've talked to them about people in their country. I've talked to people that have traveled to Iran. You go to Iran as an American today, and I will guarantee you the Iranian people, the populace, will treat you like the greatest guest in the world. They love Americans. Okay. They hate the federal government, and with a lot of justification. And now with these sanctions, they're killing Iranian people. Right now, they have the highest rate in this coronavirus crisis, and U.S. officials are doubling down and putting more sanctions on them. You talk about our inability to get masks and stuff. Theirs is multiplied, not to mention the widespread economic devastation for years. When we see what's happening here with American businesses with this lockdown, people going bankrupt, this is what the Iranian people have been suffering for decades because of these sanctions, or years for these sanctions.
Okay. Clyde, you got a question for him?
Well, I think we had a similar conversation to that one a few episodes back, Barney. So we'll kind of steer the conversation back a little bit. I want to go back to coronavirus and sort of the authoritarian state. In our last episode, we talked about the silver linings of COVID-19. And one of the things that we discussed was how all of a sudden a lot of medical regulations and things like that were being completely bypassed. Doctors were able to consult across state lines. Hospitals were figuring out that the ventilators, the pumps could drive more people than just one each. The pumps could actually support multiple people, and all they had to do was, fiddle with the hoses and add extra hoses and split them off, and they could run these differently. They're putting more people into rooms, or at least being prepared to put more people into rooms, and seeing that we can get costs down, we can accommodate more people, we can work with maximum efficiency if we just get some of these regulations out of our way. These regulations are being proven to be in the way, yet people seem to be really eager for more authoritarianism in their lives. You know, you see you don't go outside, and people are okay with police stopping people in their cars to find out if they're going somewhere that the central planners consider essential. So in a post-COVID-19 world, you know, how's that shape up? Do you see that as a freer world with fewer regulations, or a more locked down, you know, subjugation kind of situation?
I think the jury's out. I mean, that's just what this battle is about. It's a life or death battle now. And this is what Americans have to choose. That's why I would love to win this nomination, so I can place this choice before the American people. That if you want this system, vote for Biden or Trump. If you want out of this crisis, then vote for me. Because libertarianism is the way out of this. And your points are excellent, that what's happening here is, notice the vitality that is coming about from people in the private sector who are breaking these regulations. It gives you a hint of what I've been talking about, a free market healthcare system. And if I could describe that a little bit more. What we're talking about with a free market healthcare system is a total separation of healthcare in the state, where the government plays no role, like church and state. The government doesn't interfere with churches and regulate churches. That's what libertarians want with respect to healthcare. Now, one thing we've learned in this crisis is that one of the secrets to keeping the infection toll down, the death toll, would have been testing. You test everybody, and then you can tell who has the virus, and you can start isolating. So imagine if we had a free market healthcare system, and I've been calling for a free market healthcare system for 30 years in my work at the Future of Freedom Foundation. And we published a book in 1994 called The Dangers of Socialized Medicine. Well, in a free market system, just imagine what would have happened based on what you were talking about breaking these regulations. You've got entrepreneurs rushing into the market to furnish masks and testing kits. You don't have anti-gouging laws where people could accumulate things. Entrepreneurs, speculators thinking, you know, they were warned about this pandemic 3 or 4 years ago, if not longer. There would have been people, you know, mounting these things up and not worrying about getting prosecuted for gouging. Well, imagine in a free market system. Remember, I told you that prices are low, prices are stable. Amazon flooding every household with 100 testing kits at $2 each. Everybody in the family starts testing on every 3 or 4 days. If somebody tests positive, he isolates, the family isolates, they contact their friends where they contact them, they isolate, but everybody that's still well continues operating in the marketplace. So you don't have this massive lockdown. All right, what about people that are testing positive and go out and infect somebody? Well, I don't think you need the quarantine zones. I think all you need is criminal and civil penalties for this. If somebody knows he's infected and he goes out and intentionally or negligently infects somebody else, why not a civil lawsuit for that? Why not a criminal penalty for manslaughter or negligent homicide? Then that provides the incentive to the person. If he thinks he might get sued for $1 million because he caused somebody's death, that's the incentive to stay at home. And now you have people that are isolating themselves that you know are sick, while everybody else continues to work. You wouldn't have this massive bankruptcy going on with the Neiman Marcus is on the verge of bankruptcy. Macy's is closing down. Lord & Taylor's. You wouldn't have this massive economic destruction in a free market. Now, would people be making money on this? Yeah. And let me give you one more example of the vitality of a free market. There's a brewing company called Dogfish Head Brewing Company. And the president of Dogfish Head put a little 3-minute video op-ed on the New York Times, which I highly recommend. It's about a couple of weeks ago, where he said, fascinating guy. He says, hey, I saw an opportunity here. I took my alcohol that I do for beer and I converted it into hand sanitizer. And we started producing hand sanitizer, dogfish head hand sanitizer, and flooding American hospitals with it. The hospitals were so grateful. He says, I'm not doing it for free. I got payroll to meet. But the profits he did make on it, he donated to a fund of unemployed hospitality workers. This is the vitality of a free market. This is what the central planner can never conceive of when he's coming up with a central plan. I guarantee you Donald Trump and his team of experts, the Centers for Disease Control, would have never thought about directing under the Defense Production Act dogfish head to produce hand sanitizer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of the brilliant things about a free market economy that those types of things can actually happen. You actually can reward the people who actually produced what society needed at the time it most critically needed it. I think that person should become rich. That's exactly who should become rich, not some bureaucrat.
Exactly. And you've got the mixture. That's what's fascinating about a genuinely free society. You got a mixture of those who are profit seeking and benefiting mankind in the process of making a profit. And then you've got those that are donating their time and energy. And so you've got this fascinating confluence of profit seeking and charity that produces an outcome that no central planner could ever do. And it's meaningful. I mean, look how meaningful this guy must feel about what he's doing in his life by helping out sick people in hospitals, even while he's making money. And then, interestingly enough, he donates the money. So that's what I'm trying to recap.
But he can donate the money because he's rich, or at least well enough off that, you know, that he can afford to let that money go.
Absolutely.
And without the productive capacity, he wouldn't be able to benefit mankind in that way.
Excellent point. And that was my point about when America had a system where everybody could keep everything they earned. When people were free to accumulate these unlimited amounts of wealth, were there disparities of income? Yeah, there was multimillionaires like John D. Rockefeller and so forth compared to people that, you know, nowhere near that. But then Rockefeller starts building all these beautiful buildings and libraries and museums and funding universities. You couldn't do that if you don't have the money. I mean, that point you're making is perfect. You got to have the money in order to be donating the money.
Exactly. Yep.
Clyde,
Okay.
while we've got Mr. Hornberger here, I think we ought to make sure there's a little time for him to talk about education.
Okay.
And let's launch into it this way. What do you say to people who put forth the argument that education is a common good like roads?
I totally reject it. That you know, any more than churches or religion is a common good. I mean, it depends on how you define common, but are people interested in religion? Of course. Are they interested in going to church? Of course. But that doesn't mean that government should be building the churches. And it's the same thing with respect to education, that education is a seeking process. And when the government takes it over, it becomes a cramming process. I mean, look at how we know about our philosophy, libertarianism or conservatism, or you guys are doing podcasts. You had to do a lot of self-study on how to master what you were going to do here. And you were interested in it. You were passionate about it. I'm sure you stayed up late nights reading books on it and trying to figure it out. That's true education. You're seeking knowledge because you want to. You get into this public school system, and all it is an indoctrination center. They destroy the love of learning. By the time a kid gets out of high school, he hates to read. He hates to learn, as compared to like when he was 0 to 6. Man, he was asking why. He was absorbing everything. He had this natural love of learning. That's smashed out of him. The only solution to the educational crisis that we have is a separation of school and state, just like we separate church and state. Get government out of education, a total free market educational system where entrepreneurs are furnishing families with all kinds of options, where parents control the education of each child, because as you all know, each child is different. Each child is a unique. And so instead of this cookie cutter regimented mold in government schools, just have the dynamism of a free market. It's really the only solution. It's the only system that is consistent with a free society.
So let me play devil's advocate. I'm inclined to agree with you there, but the left side of the conversation would say, but how do you ensure that the most economically challenged people don't get left behind?
Well, you look at churches, for example. Let's say that we had a public churching system for 225 years. and the government's running the churches, and there's still some private churches too, and there's a voucher system for public churches and to help people get out of the public churching system and get into the private churching system. And I come along and I say, Clyde, I think this thing's a total mess. I mean, children hate going to church, they hate God. Why don't we just get government out of the churching business? Well, you might say, wait a minute, Jacob, where will the poor go to church? I mean, the churches are built by the rich people. They're not going to let those poor people in. And I would argue, well, no, I think the rich will build the churches, but I think they'll let the poor in. Oh, Jacob, you libertarians are too radical. Well, we look at this. I mean, poor people have the ability to go to church anytime they want. They don't even have to donate a dime. Nobody checks people at the door to see if they've donated. What we have to do is have that same faith in a free market educational system where there's entrepreneurs furnishing educational vehicles to every level of society. Now, might the rich get better education? Well, of course. I mean, just like the rich get better cars and better homes, mansions, and so forth.
They get better public education.
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, the people that pay the biggest price are the people in the ghettos for this system. But in a free market system, you've got entrepreneurs that are catering to the poor. There's a lot of money to be made among the poor in terms of volume. I mean, look at McDonald's. McDonald's caters to effectively poor people, and they make a killing. Now, I'm not suggesting that's necessarily the best thing to eat every day, but I'm saying that entrepreneurs would cater to every echelon in American society, and then people make the best of what they have. I mean, look how many kids have come out of the ghetto and become stars, brilliant people, because they understand that education is a seeking process. They're looking for this tutor or that teacher or that school, and they're going after it. But I think the government, with all these bureaucracies and regulations, they serve as a block to people discovering who they are, how they develop as a human being, what their role in life is. And some people never discover it because the government system diverts them from the course that they were on when they were kids.
Okay.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
Do you mind if we switch gears a little bit here? We're running close on time. Again, I've got the time, but I want to be respectful of your time, sir.
I'm fine. I mean, I'm enjoying this thoroughly.
I'm enjoying this thoroughly too. So
Me too.
I'm sure my wife is going to want me back at some point, though. So in 2016, the LP ran former New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson as the presidential candidate. I'm not a Gary Johnson hater, but he had a couple of gaffes. The media really pounced on those. They really hated Trump with this insane passion. But I think the thought of a real outsider, a third party candidate coming in and actually performing well, making a try for the highest office, I think they thought that was unacceptable. The powers that be thought that was unacceptable, even more so than a Trump presidency. And they just pounced on Gary. And now that same media, they're ignoring the fact that Joe Biden is practically going senile before our very eyes. And, how does someone like you, I'm assuming you get the nomination, how does somebody like you genuinely compete in that media environment, especially considering, and sorry, this is a long-winded question, but especially considering that in 2016, Gary Johnson couldn't get on the debate stage because he didn't meet the 15% threshold in a certain number of polls. That was the requirement, but he wasn't even on the polls to begin with. So how do you get on the debate stage, and how do you compete in that environment?
I think that what we do, and I think this crisis provides an excellent opportunity for this, is that we circumvent the mainstream press. We develop a new public opinion that is outside them. Because let's face it, they have a vested interest in the status quo themselves. I mean, they're all Democrats, they're all Republicans. They all look at libertarianism as a radical philosophy. They're part of the problem. And so the last thing they want is libertarianism to be considered and heard by the American people. And of course, this presidential debate thing's a rigged racket. That they're going to figure out whatever the poll limit that libertarians can't reach. And if we get close to reaching it, they'll just raise it. So, and of course, that's what ballot access barrier laws are all about. They don't like the competition. That's what this whole racket is all about, campaign finance laws. and these ballot access barriers. It's all about keeping the Democrats and Republicans in power, whether it's one or the other. It's musical chairs. They just don't like the competition, and that's what they're concerned about with the Libertarian Party, and to a certain extent, the Green Party and the Constitution Party. So I say, let's develop a new public opinion that circumvents these people. And the big advantage we have that didn't exist 20 years ago is the internet. I mean, like what we're doing right now, or we're doing on our website now since the big shutdown. I mean, before the shutdown, this race has been a transformative event in my life. I was loving it. I went to some 19 state conventions, or 18, something like that. And just, you could feel the electricity and the movement. The excitement was palpable of what's going on. And then all of a sudden the shutdown comes. But look, there's that old ancient symbol for crisis. It's composed of two other symbols, danger and opportunity. And this is an opportunity for us here, that we have the ability to use the internet to reach people, unlimited numbers of people. Right now, we are on our website, we're doing on Facebook, we're doing a live stream every Tuesday night, Ask Me Anything, where anybody can come in and ask me any question they want. And we sometimes go 2 hours because there's so many questions coming in. That is what we could do in this crisis. I got a feeling there might not be any big rallies anymore that are going on where Trumps can talk to 50,000 people and stuff. So that pretty much puts us on an even keel, not in terms of television ads, but in terms of internet communication with people, where they come and say, let's see what these libertarians are about. Let's see what Jacob Hornberger's about. They can come in, they can see my videos, they can see my articles. That could be a great equalizer in the 5 months that we have before this general election, where people can really compare. What is Joe Biden standing for? What is Donald Trump standing for? What is Jacob Hornberger Libertarian standing for? And like I say, I'll put our weapons, Libertarian Party weapons, against their money and power any day of the week. Our weapons are principles, ideals, and sound ideas on liberty. And I think that's more powerful than all the money and political power in the world.
I'd like to pose this to you. This is something Clyde and I discuss a lot. And there's a Venn diagram overlap with regard to this, and then there's some that fall outside. But Mr. Hornberger, who are some of your heroes? Who are some of the great thinkers and writers that you feel have shaped the philosophy you embrace?
Well, right near the top is Ludwig von Mises.
Okay.
Mises was absolutely the greatest economist who's ever lived, and very principled. I mean, Mises makes the principled, no compromise case for a free market economy. And so there's nobody better than Mises in terms of libertarian economics. To a certain extent, also Hayek, although Hayek was not as pure libertarian as Mises, he's pretty much up there, like 98%. I mean, his concepts of the spontaneous order are just brilliant, and the denationalization of money. There's also the guy that really changed the course of my life was Leonard Read, who was founder of the
author of I, Pencil.
Exactly. Oh, yeah, okay. Brilliant piece. I, Pencil. In fact, anybody watching this show, go Google I, Pencil, and you will be mesmerized by that essay. It is so insightful and so brilliant, and it really tells how a free market operates. But I wrote an essay that the Freeman that is published by Fee published called Leonard Read Changed My Life. And he did. I mean, Read could write in such a way that was incredible. Like, I felt like he was talking to me. And I would recommend every single book written by Leonard Read. Ayn Rand played a big role in my life, especially Atlas Shrugged. And I had the opportunity to see her give her last public speech before she passed away. It was fantastic. Those are the ones that come to mind. Real life heroes. Ron Paul's one of my real life heroes. I mean, Ron to me is heroic. The way he has stood against the establishment and all this tyranny and oppression and the courage that he has shown. I mean, it's just inspiring. Okay. And I think those are the big ones. Murray Rothbard to a certain extent. I'm not an anarchist like Rothbard was, but Rothbard's writing is just relentless in favor of the free society. It's fantastic.
It is. I love Rothbard's take on the true nature of the state. It's just brilliant. It's just like, this thing is a mafia made up of succubi. It's just a productivity sucking machine, amoral productivity sucking machine. So, and I always attributed the pencil thing to Milton Friedman. So I just learned something today. So thank you for that.
Yeah, there's another guy that's not a libertarian. His name is Chalmers Johnson. He's deceased now. But if anybody wants to learn libertarian foreign policy, go read Chalmers Johnson. He's got a trilogy of books that are fantastic. Blowback, which was done before 9/11, where he predicted that foreign policy would lead to terrorism on American soil. The Sorrows of Empire, and Nemesis. Those three books, you read those and you will know more about libertarian foreign policy than most everybody else.
Okay, I'm going to put them all in my Audible queue as soon as possible. Hopefully they're on.
In fact, Chalmers Johnson, if you want to get a taste of him, you can find all kinds of essays written by him online, every single one of which is absolutely fantastic. And this guy's not just a crank. I mean, he served as a consultant to the CIA before he broke through and started realizing all this imperialist stuff and how destructive it was.
Fantastic. I can't wait. Okay. Well, I think we should wrap it up there. Barney, did you have any other questions for Mr. Hornberger?
No other questions. I just like to say this has just been an incredible hour, a stellar episode of Barney and Clyde. And we're just immensely grateful that you took a little time this afternoon to be part of this. And I've found it eye-opening as a conservative and as a lover of freedom. And we're just really pleased that we were able to make this happen.
It's been a pleasure for me. But Barney, I have a question for you.
Sure. Okay.
I mean, maybe we can explore this in a later show.
All right.
You sure sound like a libertarian to me. I don't understand what
I almost am. And Clyde works on me all the time. Yeah.
I honestly think that Barney is, because, like I said, I think that the social conservative can fit in the libertarian box, because someone like Barney is not willing in most cases to force his view of society, conservative as it may be, on other people. And I think, Barney, we've had this conversation many times before, that you believe that people should have the right to be foolish or make decisions that you find abhorrent, mostly. I think I would give people a pass on more social issues than you would, but for the most part, I don't see you wanting to force social conservatism on other people.
Yeah. It's probably that foreign policy thing, and if you're willing, we can explore that further and have you back and explore that further.
It'd be great. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. It's an honor and a pleasure.
Likewise. So you can find more about Jacob Hornberger's candidacy at jacobforliberty.com. That's spelled out the word for jacobforliberty.com. I think your blog is fff.org/blog.
Right.
Any other media you want to plug before we go?
We're on Facebook at Jacob for Liberty, but those are the principal things there for the campaign are my website, jacobforliberty.com, and I have a very active blog section. I got videos, I got articles. I mean, we've gone from the start of the shutdown, we've gone right into the internet or part of this campaign. In fact, we just published today, it was really exciting, an anti-war video where it's a professionally produced video on why we need to end foreign interventionism. So I think people will really find that interesting. And then if people want to see the work I've done over the years for the Future of Freedom Foundation, which again, I should emphasize doesn't endorse me, they can't do that, but you can get a sense of my work by going to fff.org. And thank you, guys. I'm just very grateful for this opportunity.
Yeah, likewise.
Absolutely. It's been incredible.
Yeah.
Yep. I really want to live in a world where Jacob Hornberger is president.
Thank you very much. I do too.
All right.
And to our viewers, I would say what we always say as we conclude things: stay vigilant about your liberty.
Yeah, and stay well.
Well, that's an interesting development.